Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee, and thanks everybody. I'm delighted you're here. And to my streaming friends, thank you for being here also. Rochelle, we missed one thing. Could I have a glass of water, please? So, when I was talking with Lee and saying, what is it that you want? What kind of a really great keynote would you want me to talk about? And we said something about people. In this conference, we've been talking about life cycles and metrics and process and teams, a lot about teams, and some about facilitation, and some about collaboration. And when you think about software, I always think about people. I don't know how you folks got into this field, but I got into this field because in college, I took a computer science class, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is so much fun. And they'll pay me to do this. How astonishing is that? And then I got out of school into my first job, and I fully expected to be one-on-one with a terminal. Never occurred to me that I would actually have to work with people. And in order to get anything done, I actually had to talk to the people next to me in my cubicle. Thank you, Lee. The people across from my cubicle, the people down the hall. We had a cubicle farm. And I thought, you know, this people stuff is really kind of astonishing. I'm not a people person, as in I don't get up every morning and think, oh, there are millions of people to love in the world. Some of you do. I think, well, I mean, not me, but some people do. And so for me, the people stuff is always the really challenging stuff. And it's not just challenging for me. I suspect it's actually really challenging for your managers. Because when I work with managers and when I work with teams, a lot of times managers say things such as, we just need to get the right people. We'll plug them in here, right? Like there's a cog or a place, and that somehow, you know, there's a person who's going to be next to me and we're going to link arms and walk down the yellow brick road or something like that. And then they can work on their problems, right? Those people will plug them in, they'll solve those particular problems. And if your model of working together is a factory, or if your model of management is factory management, that actually makes some sense. Except the problem is that people are not like robots. Robots, unless you've screwed up the programming, are completely deterministic. Okay, pretty close to deterministic. People are nothing like that. And so it's a really interesting problem. How do you move from we can just plug in people in the right place to how do we get people to actually work together and collaborate? When I think of software, I think of it as a design activity. So for me, I'm not talking about just development where you get to write code. I'm talking about development and testing and documentation and the interpretation of requirements and how do we give people help, how everything around the product. To me, that's all software. And so if that's software, how do we collaborate? How do we make it work? How do we work together? And that's where the people stuff comes in. So when I think about collaboration, I think about a really kind of specific approach to management. And that approach is that we have to manage the human needs, not human resources. Okay, I have a rant, right? Those of you who know me know I rant a lot. This business of calling departments human resources is a bad idea. I don't know about you. I have never been a resource. I've been a person. I have put my energies on projects. I have worked with people. I have done all kinds of stuff, but a resource is money. A resource is capital equipment. People are not resources in the same sense that hard goods and hard capital are resources. Because people can renew themselves, and goods and capital do not renew themselves. So we have to pay attention to the renewal of our humans. And if I had a recipe for this, I would just give you the recipe. We could have, a different conversation. But I suspect as I go through this, you're going to have some questions, especially since I just ranted about this business of human resources. So as questions occur to you, please walk up to the mics, and my friend Jean in the back is going to be taking questions from the streaming folks. Right, Jean? Yes. Okay, I can sort of see her wave her hand. And so if you have questions, you should interrupt me. This is perfectly good, because what I want to talk about is how we serve the human needs of the people in our organizations. How do we make the human beings do a really great job? And part of the problem is that some people think that this is how software works, that there's a manager in the middle, a project manager maybe, or a person manager or something, and that manager says, go do, and go do, and go do, right? And people are supposed to go do. And the problem with that thinking is that we all got hired because we have very interesting brains, and we know how to solve problems. And so go do is not the same as go solve, right? So when you have to go solve a problem, you think about working in a very different way. When we go solve problems, when we create software, you can think of us as little networks with SneakerNet, where we go and work with a couple people sometimes, and maybe work with a few more people other times. And then we have these folks over here that we also ask about. So for example, I have some friends and colleagues in the front row. Payson, how many times have I asked you to review articles for me? Several. Yeah, he's being nice. It takes more than two hands. Dan, how much have I asked you to review for me? Often. Yeah, see, my friend sat in the front, so I could call on them. But this is how we work, right? Whether it's peer review, which is the example I just used, or actually solving a problem together. We work together even if our managers think that we're on a one-person project, we're actually working with a whole bunch of people. So when you start thinking about collaboration and how we actually work with people, and the fact that our human needs need to be replenished, you start thinking about a little bit different way of approaching maybe organizations, certainly management. So when I think about the implications of our human needs, the idea is that managers manage people, and not in a directive way, although those of you who've seen me have noticed that I've said, you can come sit down in front, there's room, right? That's a more directive approach. But normally, it's that you manage the people and their ability to do the job, not the specific tasks, right? People don't always, in fact, frequently, people don't need to be told how to do something. They often want to be told, here's a problem, go solve it. Here are the results I want, give me those results. And as long as we don't damage other people in the organization, and we don't damage ourselves, and we don't damage anything else, then many ways of getting this done are fine. Managers then have to manage the system, how people get work done in the organization. And we all are part of this system. You can think of it as an ecosystem. You can think of it as a dynamic system. It almost doesn't matter how you think of it. But it's definitely a system where people rely on each other. and people help each other, and people ask for specific work, and people deliver specific work. So there's an ebb and a flow, as in many ecosystems, and there's a bunch of things that happen when people request something and it doesn't happen until later. People manage themselves and their work. And this is, I think, really important. Most people, how can I say this nicely? Let me rewind. It's not that most people have forgotten this. It's that some managers, and unfortunately for us, many of the managers at the top of the organization, have forgotten that people manage themselves and their work, right? And so how do we help them remember? Well, we can think about it in a number of ways. First, we can say, what is it about our culture that's working for this people-oriented approach to work? And then what do we think about how we hire people? What do we do to help people become great managers so that they can influence the people at the top? And how do we empower great teams? So those are the 4 things I really wanted to discuss today. So when we think about culture, a lot of times people think about North American culture. That's where we are right now. My folks who are streaming in from wherever, you could be all over the world. You have your own culture based on your nation or your nationality or your physical location in the world. And we think about Western or Eastern cultures. But let's talk a little bit about corporate culture. Because when you think about corporate culture, I think it's just a little bit different. There are a few things in corporate culture that sort of frame a culture of an organization. What can you discuss and what can you not discuss? Have you ever been in a company where you could not discuss quarterly results? I have. It's depressing, especially when it's a publicly traded company and you can see the sales going down, right? That's not very much fun, but we couldn't talk about it. There are lots of other things you can't discuss. How many of you can actually discuss salaries in your organization? Yeah, some of us who are self-employed can discuss salaries. We have little conversations with ourselves. But many of you, and much larger, yeah, I know, I also talk to myself in the hall as I'm walking. Many of you work in much larger organizations where discussion of salary is actively frowned upon, if not discouraged, if not, a horror and a shame and practically illegal. Well, that's part of the corporate culture. What does it mean if someone says we have an open culture but we don't discuss salary? Well, I see a little bit of a problem there. So you want to think pretty hard about what do we discuss and not discuss, and what stories do we tell about ourselves and our teams? I have a couple of stories later that might be kind of fun. What is rewarded? I cannot tell you the number of times I've been in organizations where top management decided to reward developers or anyone involved in product development based on the number of hours they appeared to work in a week. And when you have people who game the system, senior management gets particularly perturbed. I once worked in an organization where the senior managers came in pretty early every day and left pretty late, and there was a developer whose car was always there. He was there morning, noon, and night. He was there at 1 in the morning. He was there at 6 in the morning. He was there at 10 o'clock at night. His car was there. And then we had a snowstorm. And his car was still there during the snowstorm. Snowed about 2-3 feet. We get that in Boston every so often. And his car was still there. But there was no one in the building. And the problem is that this developer had gotten an award the previous quarter for putting forth the most effort or the most they actually gave it, I think the award was called a Teamwork Award, which is kind of astonishing. Because he was there working all the time. They gave him an award for teamwork. And then they discovered that he came in at, 8 o'clock on Monday morning, driving himself in. His wife picked him up at 4:30 every day. His car was still there, and his wife dropped him off at 9 the next morning and picked him up at 4:30 because she was doing the carpool run for the kids, and he was just involved in the carpool run for the kids. And then on Friday at about 7, he would drive home. So he was not working a ton of overtime, although it certainly appeared that he was working a ton of overtime. And unfortunately, this snowstorm really screwed things up for him because he was on track to get the team award again. I know, it's kind of, you can't make this stuff up because it's just so astonishing. And then the problem is that senior manager feels as if they've been had, right? And in a sense, they have been, because someone has gamed the system, because this is what the stories we tell about ourselves, or what gets rewarded. And people will do things that get rewarded. There's no question about it. And then there's the question of, how do people treat each other? I've been in some organizations where everyone had to be happy with a result. You could have a discussion. The discussion could be somewhat contentious, but you couldn't make a decision until every single person was happy. That organization took a very long time to make decisions. I've also been in organizations where it was really important that we have conversations at a loud volume. Other people might think those conversations were yelling. If you ask the people there, they would say, "No, we're just being really loud." "You're not yelling?" "No." Okay, so it's, how do people treat each other? Those are all the pieces of culture that shape the organizations that we're in. And so when you think about what does culture actually mean when you start thinking about the organization? Well, people start saying, we have an open culture, okay? We have a team-based culture. Well, okay, but who are the teams? I bet a bunch of you are either in the middle of transition or transitioning from functional groups where you had developers as a group and testers as a group and BAs as a group and even project managers as a group, to a more cross-functional team where you have enough people from across the organization to get the work done. Well, people affiliate with certain members, certain teams in different ways. Is the affiliation strong with the project, or is the affiliation strong with the functional group? We call those functional groups teams, but unless people are actually working together, they're not a team, they're a group. So you really want to understand what kinds of things are we talking about when we talk about our team-based cultures. You're the only one who knows for sure what's going on in your organization. Now, one thing I noticed, and this is one of the companies I worked for a number of years ago, that management thought they had a really different culture than what people thought. Management thought, we have an open, honest culture. We can talk about anything. We have a fun-loving culture. We get together for all kinds of holidays, not just Christmas and New Year's, but Halloween and Patriots' Day and Memorial Day and July 4th. In fact, we have a summer picnic every year, and everyone brings their families and has a great time. What do you think those of us who had small children at the time thought of those parties? We called them mandatory fun. In fact, since I was a manager in the organization, I had to go. I had to bring my husband and my 2 small children, one of which was a toddler at the time, and thought that any body of water was appropriate for taking off all of her clothes and jumping into. We had many summer parties where we say, we have to at least put a bathing suit on you, honey, right? Now, naked 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds are quite cute, but it's hard to have that sort of professional approach when someone's trying to talk to you about work and you're trying to keep your kids' clothes on. And this business of mandatory fun was certainly not what our senior managers thought we had. We thought it was mandatory fun. They thought of it as a paternalistic appreciation for the people doing the work. So you can see that there's a huge disconnect between what we thought of as the events and what they thought of as the events. And one of the things that we see, at least that I see a lot in organizations, is that management has its own culture, and the rest of the organization has its own culture. This is especially difficult to get away from the larger the company you're in, because senior managers are so far removed from the day-to-day work of the work that you do. So it's not surprising that they would have a different culture in terms of what's rewarded, what's discussed, and how people treat each other. But what's interesting is that you can put your own stamp on the corporate culture. Let me tell you a little story about a group that called themselves Hostages. The HOSS stands for Home Office Software Support. And so, would you really want to be part of a team that was called HOSS? No, there's too many horse jokes around. You don't want to be HOSS. But you might call yourselves Hostages, especially if you feel that you're hostage to email and the phone, and at this time it was the fax machine. Not all of our clients had email. So we had people who were, this is the software support group. And one day, one guy came in wearing a camouflage jacket. They all thought, this is very cool. We all have to get camouflage jackets. So they did. Some of them got camouflage t-shirts. Some of them got camouflage pants. I never saw any camouflage shoes. Do they make camouflage shoes? Yeah, okay, I didn't see any of those. And for years, the Hostages wore some kind of camo. Now, the interesting thing is that if you volunteer to work as a hostage for a day, which was something that we often did, you were told to bring your own camo, or they would, get you a piece of camouflage clothing so that you could identify with this group. I worked in that company for 5 years, and by the time I left that company, there was not a single person left in the original hostage group that had started to wear camo. But the pattern of wearing camo, the culture of wearing camo persisted the entire time. So even though there had been an entire turnover of the entire group, these people kept this culture. They kept the name, they kept the appearance, and they kept the same approach to work, which was, we might not like the fact that we have to be on call and listen for the darn phone and answer all these emails, where the first question you really have to ask is, when people say the machine's not working, you have to say, is the power on? Right? I mean, it's one of those jobs. On the other hand, they kept their culture, and it stayed with them the entire time that I was there. The company no longer exists, so I can't tell you if that culture still exists. But the camo part of it had migrated from the East Coast to the West Coast. We had offices in both places. And so it's kind of interesting that the culture, right, a group, a team of people who work together as human beings can put their own stamp on the corporate culture. So I have a question, and I'm not going to ask you to stand up because that way people could actually see your badge. And those of you who are listening to streaming, I would like you to think about these questions also. How many of you work in an organization with at least 2 distinct cultures? Yeah, that's not surprising. That's at least a third of you possibly more. And of those who work in organizations with at least 2 distinct cultures, how many of you would say that you are either Agile or transitioning to Agile? Which culture? It's a good question. The corporation, the organization is transitioning. So you can imagine that there'll be a lot of culture clash, for lack of a better term. And if you think about it, what does this mean for your ability to fully transition to Agile? If you have, I mean, Agile is all about transparency. And what I like to say is that Agile requires management transparency to really do it right. And if you have a set of managers who are unaccustomed to transparency, this is a real, I was going to say nudge, but it's much more than a nudge. It's a real push on them and their ability to work. So just as developers and testers had to get to a notion of a team notion of done, what does done mean for us as a project team? Your managers have to get accustomed to a different notion of culture. This is a really difficult thing for them to do. And I know that there are some managers here, but those of you who are not managers are going to have to bring back this message and say, it's okay, you're going to have to practice. This is a big deal. So when you think about people in the organization, you have to think a lot about the culture of the organization and what it might have to do, especially if you need it to change. So let me go on to hiring. When I talk about hiring, I talk about people who are capable of fitting into a group. I am not talking about hiring exact replicas or clones of the people who are already there. Someone who fits the culture enough is probably good. Someone who is not the same as everyone, that's what the mini-me's are. I don't want someone who's exactly the same as everyone else. I once worked in an organization where someone said, Charlie, he's really fabulous. We want 5 more testers just like him. I don't think so. He might be fabulous, but why would you want 5 more people precisely the same? Why wouldn't you want some diversity? So how do you make sure that you hire someone who fits the work and the team well enough, and that you have enough diversity to get the work done? I am a huge fan of diversity. In fact, I blogged about this earlier this week. In fact, I think that what you need is significant personality diversity and work background diversity. You need people who don't know it can't be done. I worked as, I believe I was called a software engineer in a machine vision company many years ago, early in my practicing of being a human part of my career, which is still going on. And I was working with a PhD in optics or something like that. We were trying to do inspection on a printed circuit board, right? That's what machine vision people do. They do inspections of things. So we were trying to figure out how to get the lighting right, because it had to work in a factory. First, we had to get it to work in the lab, because if you can't get it to work in the lab, you certainly can't get it to work in a factory. And the regular lighting just wasn't good enough. And so I know enough about physics to be dangerous, right? I last took physics back in college. Do I remember it? No, right? I will freely admit that. I remember much more geometry than I remember physics. And I don't remember that much of that either. So when I think about, I was thinking about this problem, and I said, well, what if we got different colored lights? And everyone poo-pooed me. Different color lights won't make any difference at all. And I said, well, I'm going to Standard Electric because it's on my way to work. I'm just going to pick up a bunch of different colored fluorescent light bulbs because we had fluorescent fixtures. And I picked up, because printed circuit boards were green, right? So I picked up green, thinking that it might help. And everyone said, that's stupid. I found some light blue. I found some red, and I found some pink. Okay, so everyone said, well, the green is the last one you should try. And I listened to them because, you know, I have a degree in computer science. I don't know anything about physics or optics. So we tried the pink, couldn't see a thing. Tried the red, couldn't see a thing. And the optics people are saying, well, there's just blue and green left. So they were fighting among themselves. I put the green light in. You could see it. Right? Now this went it was counterintuitive to everybody. It turns out, of course, there's lots of good reasons for it between the reflection and the refraction, and I can't remember all that stuff. So no one told me, well, they kept telling me I couldn't do it, but that, you know, I didn't listen to them either. So, but if you don't know you can't do something, and you have a history of experimenting and trying new things, you can actually learn to do all kinds of things. So diversity in hiring, as long as you have sufficient technical skills, and I think that technical skills, you have to have enough functional knowledge. How do you do the development? How do you do the testing? How do you do the requirements? How do you actually work at work? And the ability to get domain expertise, which is how do you know what's going on inside the product? How do you learn the guts of the product? That's fine. But if you don't have enough diversity in the group, you get stuck into groupthink, and you can't do these really cool products that we want to do. We are not an organization, we're an industry of innovation. Chances are quite good, if we've done this before, it's not on the backlog, it's not on the list of features to be done now. So we're always doing new things. You want people who are able to figure out, how do I take the experience that I might or might not remember that I used to do in previous jobs and apply it here? And the reason that all of the technical skills and all of this diversity stuff is really important is that if you don't have the cultural fit to go along with it, you don't have a success. Larry Summers is now, what, an economic advisor to President Obama? He's something like that. He used to be the president of Harvard. And he actually thought, at least I'm assuming this is what he thought, that it was acceptable to have open academic debate about whether or not women's brains could handle higher math. They can. Just in case any of you are worried. Right? I don't remember my geometry, but calculus, I actually do remember. So it's a really interesting problem. He was asking this question from the perspective of debate and academic openness. Okay, Harvard is I assume, wonderful academic institution. I only know how to drive through Harvard Yard. I don't go to Harvard, never have. Never will. And I am assuming that they are a university like almost every other university I have encountered, which is that academic debate in a very small, contained environment is perfectly acceptable. Academic debate on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, not so much. And so you have a culture clash here. Is Larry Summers a really smart guy? Sure seems like it. Right? Did he have some other interesting ideas for Harvard? Sure seemed like it. Did he fit that culture? Oh my God, no. So he had the diversity, he had the ability, he had the potential for doing a great job, but he was one very public example of a culture that just didn't fit. He didn't fit the culture that he was hired into. And you almost never hear about the president of Harvard now, who's a woman, though I think from the history department. And we only hear good things about her in the Boston area. Right, Abby? When we look at the newspaper, they say, Drew Faust, whatever her name is, president of Harvard, did this wonderful thing or gave this wonderful speech. It's a very different, it's an amazing contrast to the previous president of Harvard. And now you think, okay, JR, get real. We're not talking about academic presidents here. We're not talking about universities. or talking about software groups. It's the same principle. Think back to the people who did not make it in your organization, or worse, are not making it but no one's done anything about it. It's almost always a matter of cultural fit. If you interview sufficiently well, yeah, you learn about the technical skills and the ability to get domain expertise. And the rest of it is about our humanness. People who only start working at 2 in the afternoon when core hours are 10 to 4. Right? People who yell at other people thinking that it's debate instead of hearing contention or conflict. Right? Those are the cultural pieces that make us as humans up. And those are the things that if we don't take into account when doing our hiring, we don't have great teams. Now, one thing that I've been a really huge fan of for a very long time is team consensus on hiring. I actually have a whole, if not a chapter, most of a chapter about this in the hiring book. If you are part of an Agile team, or you're thinking of transitioning to Agile and you have some open recs, make sure everybody on the team interviews that person. Make sure everyone is either thumbs up or at minimum thumbs sideways. Thumb sideways is okay, I can live with that. Thumbs up is yes, I'm happy. If you have any thumbs down, do not overturn the decision of the team. Team consensus, especially with highly collaborative teams, is really important. I vetoed a team once because I was desperate. And so I really needed someone to be a release engineer for our product. There are a whole bunch of reasons why. I won't go into that. And a colleague of mine whom I had worked with before and had done a great job was available as either a permanent or contract employee. So I brought this person in. I will call this person John because this person's name was not John. So I brought John in, and everyone interviewed John, and everyone said, well, you know, we're okay, but I think we can do better. And I said, so what if I offer this person a permanent job? Oh, no, not permanent. Okay, what if it's a contract job? Well, you know, the more I think about it, the more I don't like John. That's what everyone said. And I said, well, I really feel like I'm in between a rock and a hard place. I feel like I need to get the work done. What if I offer John a temporary 6-week contract? And everyone said, well, you're the manager. Okay, but we're not really happy about it. So John came in, and John actually did very good technical work, except that John managed to anger every single person on the team within 48 hours of starting at my company. At the end of week 2, my 2 best developers and 2 best testers came in and said, JR, you get rid of John or we're gone. I said, can we last the 4 weeks? They said, no. You screwed up, you fix it. Okay. So I did. I bought the rest of the contract, and we figured out what else to do. John had actually gotten us ready enough to do enough stuff ourselves. It was an expensive mistake. It was certainly my mistake. And those of you who are managers or are thinking of vetoing what your team says, I advise you not to. If people are not excited about someone, or a bunch of excited and some's, okay, I can live with this, that person is probably not right for your team. It's probably a cultural fit. People may not feel able to articulate why, but you need to know who's coming on your team. You need to know that they can fit the culture and actually do a great job while they're there. So think pretty hard about that. So one of the other points I wanted to make is this business about becoming a great manager. And let me just say this. Managers are not born. They are created. People decide if they want to be managers. And if they decide they want to be great managers, they practice with intention. They read, they learn, they figure out what to do, and they figure out what not to do. But none of this, oh, great managers are born. Yeah, right. That's wrong. Okay, another rant that's done. What great managers do is first decide what work to work on and what work not to work on. That's a strategic decision that involves strategic planning and project portfolio management. If your managers are not doing that, they are not doing one of the most important jobs that they have to do. So, no, I am not telling you to go up to them and say, hey, buddy, work on the project portfolio. I'm suggesting that you offer this as an option for something that they could do instead of messing around in your project. Great managers also lead the hiring effort and create an environment in which people can do a great job. So first I have to do a small rant about multitasking, because multitasking, I think, is the single biggest waste of time that we have in our organizations. For me, multitasking actually comes before meetings. Because the reason you have so many meetings is because you're working on so many projects. It's just nuts. When you multitask, you can be guaranteed a few things. Your estimates are all wrong. You cannot, none of your estimates are right at all for anything ever. Was I clear enough on that? I hope so. You will be maximally slow to deliver anything. You want a product out in 6 months? Ha, ha, ha. Not going to happen. So you really need to think about who's going to do what. Because the other thing that happens is if you give people so many projects that they will decide what to do. How many of you have ever gone into work one day and said, I have so much to do on so many different areas. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what direction to go in. I'll surf the internet and read some blogs. I'll tweet. I'll do something else. But I don't know what to do. So I can't make a decision. As a manager, those of you who are managers here, you have a very important word to learn. It's only 2 letters, and it's no. Now, you get to say how you're going to say no. The story I like to tell about myself is that once when I was a middle manager, my VP came to me and said, Johanna, I'd like you to make sure that we have this project running and this project running and this project running. And I think you can spend 50% of your time here and 35% of your time here and 15% of your time there. And I said, oh, and the other 10 or 20% of my time, you want me to take care of that one too? He said, oh, yeah. And I said, what? You have to be kidding me. Did you not realize that added all up to way more than 100? And do you know what 15% of a week is? Do you know? It's like 4.5 hours or 5 hours or something stupid like that. He said, well, we need it all done. I said, you don't need it all done now. I left off the honey at the end of that, right? Because if I'd said, you don't need it all done now, honey, that would have been the kiss of death. So you don't need to have a non-career enhancing conversation. But you can say, when do you need it? You can actually start looking about ways you can say no. Because it's really important to work on one thing, finish it, and then go on to something else. So when managers actually do their job, they create a real environment for performance. And one of the first things is this business of modeling interpersonal skill behaviors. Feedback and coaching feedback is an obligation of management. Coaching is an option. And those of you in Agile teams, feedback is an obligation for each of you to the rest of your peers. People have to know that they're doing something that's useful or not useful. So, Payson, I'm going to pick on you again. So when Payson, I'm pretty sure it was you, You actually read one of my articles about project management a number of years ago, and you said something like, JR, I've heard you talk about this stuff, and you're clear. But this paragraph, and this paragraph, and this one, no, not clear at all. Not sure where you're going here. There was really helpful feedback, right? Because he couldn't even say, could you do this? It was so muddy, he had to say, I've seen you do something else. This is not what I've seen. And that kind of feedback is really helpful for people that you work with, right? It's also helpful if people give you great feedback when you say, thank you, it was really helpful. I think I actually said this. It was really helpful when you said that to me, because now I could look and say, what was I trying to say there? There's a gem in there somewhere. Maybe I can find it. And that, he helped me figure out where I was going all off. And that was good enough. I was able to take it from there. So feedback goes both ways. And on an Agile team, you really need to be thinking about feedback. This business of coaching is something that a lot of people think is just like sports. So Dan, you're a sports coach, right? You coach bowling. But coaching in the workplace can be very different. Coaching in the workplace typically has an end, a start and an end, and it's about supporting someone through a change, not necessarily saying, do this thing or do that thing to make your form better. Now, the other element I want to talk about for interpersonal skills is this business of collaboration. We collaborate in a whole variety of ways. But when I talk about collaboration, it's in the sense of a shared goal, that we want to accomplish something that's a shared goal. And that means you have to have a goal. That means you have to know where you're headed. You have to know something about this. Now, there are plenty of other interpersonal skills, such as facilitation. And those may or may not be something a manager has to do anything about or not do anything about, but a team needs to be able to facilitate itself. And that can be really hard. A team needs to know when they're not being facilitated and to get help if necessary. So when I think about this collaboration and facilitation stuff, think about people in your organization who get stuff done. There are always capable people in the organization, people that are your go-to people, people who figure out how to use the organization, and I mean that in the best sense of use, so that they can get the work done. And those capable people are probably some form of leader, but they're not necessarily called architect or manager or senior or anything else. They're the people who are able to finish work. They're the people who find some way to work with others. And they're the people who are flexible in some dimension. Rarely do you find really specialized people as the go-to people, as the highly capable people. And this adaptability is something that you want to create more of in the organization. I look at these capable people and I always want to know, how do they do that? Is it just a function of interpersonal skills? I think it's something like they can recognize what they're good at. They see where their strengths are and where their strengths aren't. And they enlist other people to help them where their strengths are not. That they sort of turn into glue between people in the organization. And you don't need a specific title to be that glue in the organization. You can just be a person in the organization doing some good work. And the problem, if you think about those capable people, that runs counter a lot of times to the manager's view that people are specialists. Remember at the very beginning, I talked about this factory approach to our industry, that people say if we get people with these skills and plug them in here, that's all we need to have a really great job, a really great product. But this almost never happens. You know, the person sitting and thinking in front of the computer all by themselves, that's so rare. What we need in the organization is generalizing specialists, people who have a little bit of talent in another dimension, right? I am not saying that all developers should turn into testers. First of all, they probably are not interested. And secondly, they may not have the temperament. And I'm definitely not saying that all testers should turn into developers for exactly the same reason. I'm not saying that developers should turn into writers, or that writers should turn into testers, or that BAs should turn into anything. It's fine to have a core set of knowledge, a core set of strengths, a core set of functional skills. But if you add interpersonal skills and you add a little flexibility to where you are, now you become so much more valuable to the organization. It's really important to think about, how do I add value to the organization? How do I do what I need to do and help people get this product out the door, whether it's a real product or a system that's released? If you think about generalizing specialists, they understand certain areas of the product really well, or have certain functional skills, and then they're able to sort of do this one-off. They're able to access other areas. So if you think about a project team, you might have people, say you have a 3-tier architecture, you might have really fabulous user interface experience people, right? People who really sing when it comes to developing a user interface. And if they understand how to connect a GUI into the middleware, and then the fact that there's something on the platform that they also need to get data from, or send data to and receive data back from, that's really cool. They may not be able to do it, but they can talk to the other people about it. And if you understand people, well, I wish I did. If you understand a system from the front to the back and back out again, you are way more valuable and you can do more work. Your whole project team can work together in a way to accomplish work that before you could not. And you'll notice this has nothing to do with life cycle. This is just about how people work together. This is a people thing. It's actually not a how we develop software thing. Now, I am not saying that specialists cannot be capable. Specialists absolutely are capable. And one of the things you have to really work at if you're a specialist is making sure that you don't become one of these specialists where you know more and more and more and more about less and less and less and less. That's a pretty dangerous place to be, because as soon as the organization transitions from that product to something else, you don't have a job. That's a kind of scary place to be. The other thing I've noticed about specialists, really narrow specialists, is that they tend to be kind of lonely. They tend to work alone. And there are some of you who probably think, I would love to work alone, at least for a day or two. All these people and them talking to me, why won't they hush? On the other hand, working alone doesn't allow you to produce a product. So you have to find a balance between really alone and working with other people. And that can be a really hard thing to find. It would be really nice if you could say as a manager, team, you're empowered. And during I think none of you were old enough, well, maybe some of you. We had the quality movement back in the 90s with total quality management. And we were big on empowering teams back then. And I can actually remember one of my senior managers at a company meeting. We talked about how we were going to move to total quality management. And he said, it was sort of like a revival. He said, "You're empowered." And we all kind of looked at him and said, "Thank you." Can we leave now? What was that about? It's a really interesting thing. Just saying it does not do it. Saying you're empowered actually has no relevance at all. It's what you do as a manager or what you do as an organization that has all the relevance. So to empower a team, you have to protect the team against outside influence, in the sense that there are always people who seem to want to take apart good working teams. Have you noticed this? You have a team that's working really well, and somebody says, these 6 people are working really well. Let's split them up, and we'll have 6 more teams who are working really well. No, it doesn't work that way. Leave those 6 people. They figured it out. Now help other people figure it out. Right? You can't take people from teams and seed them. We're not flowers. We're people. And it's one of those things that always sort of make me crazy. To really empower a team has to have everything that they need. Do they need a place to sit? Do they need a place to stand? Do they need whiteboards? Do they need a refrigerator? Do they need good chairs? Do they need a filing cabinet? Teams need all kinds of things. One of my best stories was I was a program manager at a relatively large company, and we had 3 teams all working in one area, and the senior architect was saying, I keep having to go to the chiropractor because my back hurts, my chair is really icky, and it was really slowing up the entire program. So I got him a new chair. That's all I did. I got him a chair. He thought that was the best thing since sliced bread, because now his back didn't hurt and he could stay at work and work. I mean, this is what, and I happened to be the program manager there, but I could have done that in any position. This is how you empower a team. You get the team the resources that they need. A chair is a resource, like tables and capital equipment and money, not people. So it's really important. Get the team what they need. And then you help the team members be accountable to each other. And sometimes, depending on whether or not, if you're a team member, you say, I will be accountable to you. I will finish this thing by such and such a time, and you will be able to use it, and you can report problems to me, and that's how I offer this to you, right? I am offering accountability so that you can now be accountable back to me. That's how you empower a team. None of this business of, we're going to tell it from the mountain that you're empowered. If you are a manager, you owe the team your championship, especially in an agile organization. Managers are the champions of the team. They are the protectors. They are the people who will deal with the obstacles, who will manage the outside influences on the team. They will lead the hiring, but not define it. They will lead the project portfolio management work, but not be solely accountable for it. They are the people who, when the team can't figure out what to do, the people go to their champion and say, help me. And that because the champion has a trusting relationship with everyone on the team, now the champion can actually do some great work. So if you think about yourself as a champion, not as a director or a controller, you have a lot more flexibility in what you do. It's just astonishing. I don't know how many of you have done a pilot Agile project and had it successful. Some of you. And sometimes what I hear about is you do a pilot project, it's successful, you transition to Agile, it's successful. More and more of the software organization moves to Agile. You're pumping out products, you're pumping out releases, things are good. Not everything is perfect, but things are good. Everyone is a lot happier. And then a new manager comes to town. And the new manager doesn't know anything about Agile, and the new manager decrees we will be waterfall. I wish I could tell you that was just one circumstance. But I've seen it time and time again. And you need people who are champions, whether they're managers or not, to protect the team's process from people who want to destroy it. And it doesn't have to be management, it can be something else. You have to protect the team from people who want to break up a working team, people who are actually successful working together. You certainly have to protect the team from people who want you to multitask. And then there's this issue of these silly HR reward systems. I find it fascinating that HR is called HR, right? Human resources, because I find them all too often neither human nor particularly resourceful. One of the things that's silly is if you want people to work as a team, why would you give them individual rewards? It's a good question. Now, it turns out that there's a lot of research about hybrid reward systems and individual and team-based reward systems. But just remember, the amount of bonus that people get, we're talking about a very small percentage of your base pay. People start fighting about, do we give this person 1.5% or 1.25%, right? This is a silly system. We can do better than this. And one of the things I did many years ago, I think actually close to 20 years ago, was our management decided to give a particular team a reward. I was the manager for the team. And I said to the team, I can do this in several ways. I can try and figure out who did what and give people part of this bonus. I can give you the bonus and you can decide. Or I can take the bonus for myself, which I'm not going to do. And they said, give it here. And I said, okay, do you need me to facilitate your discussion of who gets what? Everyone said, no. 80% goes to her, who was a technical writer on the team, because she helped us figure out what to do. She was the driving force behind the team, and we'll split the other 20%. Everyone said, yeah, this is a good thing. I thought they would just split it up evenly. It didn't occur to me that they would say, her, she did it. She was the driving force. Let's reward her. I was astonished, absolutely astonished. So the team knows. The team knows. You don't have to get in the middle of this. They will figure out what to do. And, of course, I assume you've all run into the furniture police, right? The furniture police say, no, you can't have a team room. Or they say, no, you have to keep the walls up with the cubicles. Or the thing I like the best is, no, you can't have a blow-up dinosaur on top of your cube wall. I mean, why not? A blow-up dinosaur is a cute thing. Why not have it at work? So the champion for the team, whomever you are, whatever your position is, deals with this stuff. This is the role of that team champion. And every team needs one. And I suspect that many of you work in teams without a team champion, which is a little bit distressing. When you think about the role of this champion, it's about assisting the team. So it's all about this business of accountability and giving feedback and receiving feedback and how do we get the work done and how are we accountable to each other? Do we know how to coach each other or are we just directive? Do we know how to collaborate? Those are all the pieces that go with assisting the team. And I think the key, if I get to say just one last thing, is that people really make software. Process can help. Metrics can help. Project management can certainly help. Management can help. But it's the people who make the software. It's always all about the people. So how do we make the people successful? How do we create a culture that works for the work? How do we manage the system and how do we empower great teams? Because it's all about the people. Thank you. So I am ready for questions. If anyone has questions, we have 2 mics in the middle and we have people in the back. Right, Jean? We have whomever our streaming people are. Yes, I see a question.
Is it on? Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
Can you offer suggestions on how to help the team learn how to hold each other accountable? Not just offer the accountability to the other team members, but actually have those other team members hold each other accountable.
So the question is, how do we help team members hold each other accountable? So I think the first thing is to finish stuff, right? If you finish work, and especially small chunks of work, right, you create a rhythm for your work. So I finish a small chunk of work, and people can see it, and the people downstream from me then know that I can be accountable for that work. So the first thing is you finish your own. And the second thing is then you request it of someone else. Now, in a whole team, what this frequently means is that everyone has to start breaking their chunks of work up into smaller and smaller chunks. And that actually helps you get stuff done, and it helps the team be accountable to each other. If you're using Delphi estimation approaches, where you estimate as a team, then you ask people, can we commit to this? That's typically done in Agile in iteration planning, but you can do this in any life cycle. There's no reason you can't, especially if you don't have to look for an entire project. You can say, you know, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, can we commit to doing this stuff? And what do we have to do to get it done?
What about the situation where there may be team members who are regularly not getting their stuff done, but the other team members are still not comfortable with whatever, saying, why not, once you feel, step up and get it done?
So the question is, what if there are people who are not getting things done and the rest of the team is not comfortable giving them the feedback, but they want that person to step up, get it done? So that's where you can, if you're a manager, you can offer, here's how you give feedback. If you're a member of the team, you actually give feedback to the person. You say, I'm going to use Joe as a name. You say, Joe, when you don't finish this thing and I need it, it makes me nervous about my deliverable and it puts me behind. Is there something I can do, or is there something you need to do to make sure that you can finish this deliverable? I mean, sometimes Joe doesn't realize he has people downstream who actually need something. That's pretty rare, but sometimes that's the case. But this is a place where feedback is really important. So if the team doesn't know how to give feedback, they have to learn. Yes?
Hi. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenges of offshore teams, outsourced parts of projects, and given that it is a reality, how to compensate for some of that.
So the question is about offshore teams, outsourced teams, and given that it's a reality, I can't say don't do that. Okay, did I get the question? So if you have offshore and outsourced teams, or what's worse, pieces of people, right? It's often common that the testers are outsourced or offshored, and they're many time zones away. I don't actually know how to tell you how to help them collaborate. I have done a few things that have worked. One is I've brought the people who are offshore or outsourced on site for a few weeks so that they could learn who the people were that they were working with and build relationships. The problem is collaboration is all about relationships, and if you don't have a relationship, why would you collaborate? The other thing you can do is make sure you break down any of the hierarchical barriers in the organization. Make sure that you treat these people as part of your team. One of the problems with a lot of outsourcing and offshoring is that it's those people over there, they have their own management, and communications is supposed to go up through the managers, across, and then over. This is a recipe for disaster. bring those people in as much as you can, make them part of the team. And then if you're willing, have a discussion about the cost of using offshore and outsourced labor with your management. Because what management has forgotten is that project costs are so much higher with offshore and outsourced people. It may not, their salaries may be a pittance, but the delay in the project is tremendous, and that's where the cost is. So it's really a problem. But see if you can, the more you treat them as members of the team, the more you are able to bring them in to collaborate. Jean, I did see your hand up there.
Hi, yeah, we do have a question from online, which is, how do you balance the need for needing an expert for short-term business value versus a more risky approach of hiring a less proficient or less expert person so that ultimately that person can get the experience long-term?
So how do you balance the immediate needs with senior people and significant expertise against someone who may not have the expertise but is available? I like to say that that's how the team manages its work, right? If you can't find precisely the person that you need, or you're not willing to spend the money for that person, which is a common problem. We need a really senior person with 25 years of experience. We're only willing to pay for 5 years of experience. So what do you do then? That's where the team has to really say, we need to reorganize our work. We need to add in checks and balances. We need to manage the risk. Because it's a risk if you think you're not going to have the experience. But you have to then make that transparent to the team so that they deal with it. I think that there was another question here.
I wanted to ask about hiring.
Yes, ask about hiring.
We do group interviews for project managers, and that works pretty well because they're supposed to work with groups of people. When it comes to interviewing for developers and testers, the existing team and asking them to participate in the process, they're really shy about it. What do you think about team interviews, the whole team interviewing candidates at one time?
Okay, so the question is, we have shy developers and testers, and so they don't want to have one-on-one interviews. They want panel interviews. Let me tell you the story of when I was being interviewed by a panel. So there were 6 people at a desk. I was wearing a suit. Back in the days I wore skirts. They gave me a lab chair to sit on. Well, you probably can't tell, but I'm only 5 feet tall, and I'm in a skirt. And so I can't get on the chair, which is fine for me, because then I say, they ask me a question, and I hold forth. Right? I say, in my last project, it worked like this, and it was like this, and it was like this. Is there a whiteboard I can use? I go to the whiteboard. I do all kinds of very interesting things. They didn't get a word in edgewise for over 20 minutes for that one question. Do you want me to manage your interview? Maybe, maybe not. I think the answer is mostly not. The idea behind an interview is that you discover whether or not this person has worked in a similar culture or is adaptable to your culture, if they've done the technical work, if they would fit in with the team. If you have people who pair interviews are actually a great idea. But if you don't pair and you're not training someone on interviewing, I don't recommend it. And I really recommend against panel interviews. It's a much better idea to teach the people how to interview. Give them a couple hours practice with each other, right? If you learn how to interview in triads, which is, I teach this, right? So you have the interviewee, you have the interviewer, the candidate, and an observer. And they have a conversation for 10 or 20 minutes. The observer takes notes, and the observer gives feedback, and the candidate gives feedback to the interviewer. Now they all trade places. They do it again. 20 minutes, feedback, they all trade places. They do it again. First of all, they now have experience doing it, and they have experience getting feedback. And they realize it's not so hard to have a conversation with just one other person, right? It is just one other person.
In the interview process, how are behavioral questions effective, do you think?
So the question is, are behavior description questions effective or behavioral?
Behavioral.
Behavioral, as in,
Like, have you ever been in a situation?
the have you ever been in a situation such as this is an effective question. That's a behavior description question. They're fabulous. They actually work really well. They're much better than hypothetical questions, and they're open-ended. They get people to tell you the story of what they did. They're great questions. I also add auditions, but behavior description questions are great. Was there another person at the mic?
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you say a few words if you belong to a part of the company, you're part of that organization that is very different culturally with the part that you're working with, kind of where you...
So how do you bridge the gap between cultures from the culture you're in and the rest of the organization? With great care. This is where it's really helpful if you can get people to come to your house, right? One of the things I see with a lot of multinational organizations is there's a home base, there's headquarters. Everyone always goes to headquarters. But what's really important is that people then go to other places, out away from headquarters, because there is a culture at headquarters, and there's a different culture in every other location. And so see if they can come to you. The other thing you might want to do is try and have some honest discussions with people and say, tell me about what you can talk about. Tell me about what's rewarded. Tell me about how people treat each other where you are. You might even use it as an interviewing question, and that way you have little more understanding of what's going on. But I think the biggest thing is if you can go to where they are and they come to you and then have a meal together. This business of eating together actually breaks down a whole bunch of cultural barriers. I'm not sure why. I'm sure there's a reason. Jean.
How can we make people collaborate?
Oh, how can we make people collaborate?
Because we have introverts and we have some people who are just plain angry.
Oh, because we have introverts and people who are just plain angry. Well, if I was a manager, I would want to know why those people are angry and do something about that. And if you have a lot of introverts, one of the things is to then look at how many extroverts you have. It turns out that if you, a highly introverted team only needs one of me, right? I'm a huge extrovert, and so if I'm not careful, I can take up all the space in the room. So what's the makeup of the team, and how do you help them, how do you help the extroverts not talk all the time? There are some things you can do for that. I sit on my hands. Every so often I actually put my hand over my mouth. Abby, I think you've seen me do this. And Payson, I know you've seen me do this. And the other thing is to then have a one-on-one conversation with the introverts and say, we need to collaborate. I need you to speak a little, and how can we make that more effective for you? It turns out that collaboration is not all just speaking. You can get people to prepare their ideas and write things down before they actually have to speak. And the introverts might be very comfortable with that. So if you don't have agendas, you need agendas. If you don't have minutes and outcomes, you need minutes and outcomes. I mean, there's some meeting etiquette and there's some collaboration etiquette that will make this work. So I believe I'm supposed to stop now. So thank you for the streaming people. Thank you for all of you. I will stick around and answer questions. Thanks, everybody. It was great.